they tend to resonate with the texts of rage and anger, and they resonate with that material more than we do. And so there's a greater reason to kind of activate those texts and activate those feelings and sentiments that are part of Islam. They're a part of Islam, just as they are a part of Jewish tradition and even Christian tradition, although not as blatantly so. By the way, the reason why there are fewer texts of rage in the New Testament is probably because the Christians saw the Jews engaging against the Romans and being so badly beaten that the texts of the New Testament tend to take a different position for its own survival. This is a kind of survivalist position. But there are also texts of rage in the New Testament as well, not expressed in kind of military language. So that's the bottom line. The bottom line is that religion is not the cause of violence in the world, but religion has been a tremendously effective means of motivating large numbers of people to engage in extraordinary behaviors. Those extraordinary behaviors can be behaviors of tremendous sacrifice on behalf of the community for healing and for helping the poor, and those behaviors can be tremendous sacrifices on what is deemed or considered behalf of the community in rage and in violent acts. Religion is not the issue. It's the way in which religion is utilized and motivated and manipulated by powers and by people who allow themselves to be manipulated in order to engage in behaviors which are either positive or negative. I'm very self-conscious about my words this evening, and I hope that you will be willing to ask some questions and engage in some dialogue on some of the difficult issues that I presented this evening. So thank you very much, and I hope that we'll have some questions. How do we want to do this? Should we just have people come up to the mic?
It seems to me, and some of the things that you said seem to echo the same thing, that religion, to propagate itself as the true word of God, at different times in the Jewish texts that I'm most familiar with, I'm not familiar with the Quran, calls for other beliefs to be purged from the land, or you will follow them, and then you will be committing outrageous acts against God. So when you say that religion can be beneficial at times, but isn't there a core of the various religions that would have, that cries out for being the one truth and maybe banishing the other competitive texts because they would dilute the prevalence of the one truth? Mm-hmm. And therefore they create conflict. You don't see it that way?
Yeah. Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I'm just now doing the page proofs on a book that is a study of chosenness in monotheistic religions, and it really addresses that issue. Look, I want to give a kind of quick disclaimer. All of my words this evening are social science approaches to the study of religion. It has nothing to do with God, right? This is the way in which religion functions in history. It's a kind of historical, social approach, not a theological approach. I have a theology as well, and I believe that we can really live together. But we can live together even with different theologies, but we have to be aware of the natural tendency to be in competition with one another. So let me work through that question or the comment that you made about the notion of being in control of the truth. In the biblical world, in the world of ancient Israel, Israelite religion, from the study of religion perspective, the historical perspective, emerged as a form of monotheism among a particular tribal community. That tribe was the tribe of Israel, or the multi-tribes of a community called Israel. And the name, interestingly enough, the tribe of Israel, the 12 tribes, but let's look at this as kind of a mega tribe, had a god with a particular name. All of the ancient tribal religions in the ancient Near East had their own national god with a particular name. The Ammonites had a god named, what's his name? Chemosh. And the Moabites had a god named Milcom, and the Philistines had a god named Dagon, and the Israelites had a god whose name we don't pronounce anymore. But they probably did pronounce it at one time because, from the perspective of the history of religions, Israel seemed to have emerged out of a tribal religion that was polytheistic like all the other tribal religions of the ancient world, but came up with a notion of monotheism, and they understood that their tribal god wasn't only for them, but was for the entire world. And that was, you can see, according to biblical scholars, a kind of transition in the very text of the Bible itself, from periods of time when Israel seems to, like, mi chamocha be'elim. Have you heard this? It means, who is like you among all the other gods that exist in the world? You're the best. It's not the way we read it when we recite that statement in the synagogue, but that seems to be the most simple, basic view of that text. So the Israelites saw themselves in a world in which they were beleaguered by everybody around them who was worshiping a different system. And that different system was polytheism that was associated with, according to the Israelite perspective, unethical behaviors. And the God of Israel was a monotheistic, ethical God that required ethical behavior. And if you begin to wander off after the other religious systems, you're not going to be a good person, and that's going to have an impact on everybody. Because in the ancient world, at least in the biblical world, an individual's behavior impacts everybody. There is no world to come in the Bible. You don't go to heaven if you're good and go to hell if you're bad in the Hebrew Bible. It doesn't exist there. If you're good, you and your community is rewarded. You're not just individually rewarded or punished. And if you're bad, your community, the crops won't come in, your flocks won't be fertile, you may starve to death, enemies may come and destroy you. But those are all community punishments and community rewards. So it was extremely important to make sure that you could carve out an area where you could be loyal to the God of the universe who had a special relationship with you. So the Israelite perspective was to create essentially a safe haven from monotheism. And the Israelites didn't really care what the other people were doing. There was no conversion, there was no effort to go out and convert the heathens to become enlightened, become Israelites. They were simply concerned about maintaining a religious, social, ethical way of life in a world that was not that way. Now, when Christianity began to emerge into history, the context was very different. Christianity and the Jews of those days were strongly influenced by Greek and Roman ideas. They were also influenced by the existence of major empires that were massive, in control of huge numbers of people. In the Israelite world, they were small groups. They were tribes fighting each other on a basically even playing field. But the name of the game by the Greco-Roman period were massive empires and kind of universalism. And so the Christian view of monotheism and monotheistic ethics was one that was more universal in scope, and from the Christian perspective, there was a sense of responsibility. Look, we're responsible for people beyond ourselves. We want the whole world to be redeemed. We feel a responsibility to bring other people to Christ. We need to help the others realize the world to come and to be saved. And so there was a kind of it was, I think, a wholehearted and a positive perspective. But what happened once Christianity became the religion of an empire with a military and political apparatus to spread it and to move it around the world, it became in some ways a totalitarian religion where one could not be saved, one could not make it in the world to come without believing in the saving power of Christ, without becoming part of that system. And that became, in essence, a kind of a totalitarian system. Now, there are vectors or trajectories of Christianity from the earliest days that are not that